Alright, you Control-Alt dysfunctions. Today I wanted to talk about this idea that's been in my mind recently. I was reading the book Maxed Out, which concerns the gigantic level of credit card debt and other forms of debt that Americans hold collectively. And there was an interesting anecdote where he notes this woman went with her husband because she was planning to co-sign a vehicle loan for him, as I guess he didn't have high enough income by himself. So they put the information to the system and it comes back. The salesperson goes, ma'am, it looks like you don't exist. And she says, what the hell are you talking about? So this goes back and forth, and the salesperson threatens to call the police because he thinks there's some scam going on. It's, a stolen identity. So she goes to investigate. She contacts Wells Fargo, and what it turned out to be is that a year and a half before, she had co-signed for a credit card with her daughter. And her daughter ended up committing suicide, but there was a data entry error, so the people at Wells Fargo listed the mom as having passed away as opposed to the daughter. That's why she couldn't access the money. That's why she wasn't down as a legit person to co-sign the loan. So whilst Wells Fargo is apologetic and corrects it, the credit rating agencies, the TransUnion, Equifax, they refuse it. They go, no, we're not going to buy it. It's some kind of fraud. So she ends up having to pay for a lawyer to force them to recognize that she's still alive. She has not actually passed away. And I was considering this in light of the story that came out where the SEC was having an interaction with MasterCard, and apparently at some level in MasterCard they want to make it okay to deny service to people who express viewpoints they don't like, such as being intolerant, speaking out against Islam. Those would just be some possibilities. And I thought, so what happens if that becomes weaponized? What happens as we march towards a cashless society when these large financial institutions, and predominantly Visa and MasterCard, they're the ones that run not just the credit cards but also the debit card transactions? What happens if you're either accidentally listed as deceased or blacklisted because of your views? I mean, we saw that with people getting kicked off Patreon, having their videos demonetized, being kicked off of Amazon because of the viewpoints they were expressing. Now that's one thing, but what if they go further than that? If we get to the point where the government says, okay, we're not going to collect all the cash and the pennies and quarters because it would be more efficient, it's easier to avoid tax fraud and tax evasion if we have no more cash. So everything's going to be done through electronic transactions. You're going to have to carry around plastic or your phone connected to your bank account all the time. Well, now we decided to delete you because we don't like your views or whatnot. You're in kind of a jam, right? Because how are you going to do anything? If your debit card doesn't work, it's not going to work to fill up your gas tank, to pay for groceries. You can't withdraw from an ATM because you're going to be declined because they're not going to allow you to use their service anymore. You have to hope that your bank is not on their side and will somehow come up with an alternative if you get kicked off of Visa or MasterCard. And that means, of course, if we're at the point where you are listed as deceased, if they just started doing that as a way to basically cut off folks, you would have to find a way to get a lawyer to prove that you still exist, like this woman had to do, but you can't access money because the MasterCard companies are saying you don't exist. So how are you going to get money to pay for the lawyer? You'd have to know someone who's willing to lend you money out of their account so that you can actually make that legal fight. See, so much of our life now revolves around swiping credit cards or the Apple Pay or whatnot, that if you can't use those services, you'd be kind of in trouble, especially if there's no cash available. This is one reason why I advocate people to accumulate some silver and gold coins. Now, I guess you might say at some point they'll say it's illegal to have those precious metals, and the government will try to seize them all, or they'll say they have no value and it's illegal for anyone to accept them as tender. Or you have Bitcoin, and folks say, well, Bitcoin is harder to regulate. That's true, but even with Bitcoin, for the transaction, you would need to have, I think you need internet access, you need your phone if you wanted to transmit them. So what happens if, because you're on a bad list, your internet service provider kicks you off? Well, now you've got to try to find a Wi-Fi spot to make the payment. And even there, maybe they list your phone and they're trying to block that as well. The point is that if we don't have actual physical currency anymore. And many of you will say, well, it's just printed by the government, it's fiat, it's worthless. But it's legal tender. It's one way that you are not having everything tracked, and it's one way they can't deliberately control you. If you have cash, you can still go about your daily business. If we have no cash and you're reliant on these people, you kind of become a slave to them, because they can freeze your account, deny you the ability to use their service for electronic transactions, cut you off from internet access to where you could use Bitcoin if you wanted to transmit it kind of immediately. So it is a very scary situation. No matter how much you think, well, I've got this money here, it's no big deal, they can just pop up one day and say, sorry, you can't pay for that, because according to us, according to the financial system, according to the government, you no longer exist.